Hello and welcome to this episode of Animasaurus. Today we're going to be having a look at the three-act story structure and how it's applied in the movie Klaus. So to start off with, what is the three-act story structure? Well, the three-act story structure is more a framework for building a story on. It's really just the simplest form of breaking down a story. It's not about the details or getting into anything that kind of gives you core things about what's going on. It's just broad brushstrokes. It gives you more freedom than what a formula would. And in the end of it, it's not really necessary. But it is so ingrained in our modern culture that it's hard to avoid. This is no means the be-all and end-all that every story has to follow, but it is a great little framework to start off with and then build on. So today we're going to be breaking down what the three acts are, and then we're going to apply them to the movie Klaus and have a look at how Klaus fits into the three-act structure. Act 1 is usually called either the setup or the beginning. First off, we get introduced to all the characters and what the characters are and how their relationship are to each other. The characters are always a key part to the story, so the characters are introduced first. We also get introduced to the world that they're in. It's always nice to know what the world is. It's a place for the characters to play in. We also get to know what the rules of that world are, because if we're talking about having different rules to the world than what we're used to, this is the time to cram those rules in. This is the point where the audience are the most open-minded about the unknown of your story. So it's the time when you can introduce things about your story that people will then expect over the whole length of the story. It's where the suspension of disbelief is at its widest. Within Act 1, you also need to include your inciting incident or your hook. This is what then elevates the story to get going and start giving direction for your key characters to run on. You usually end up with a call to action as well, so that the characters then have a place to go. And they have their means and they have their drive for what they're hoping to achieve for the rest of the story. It's setting up the questions for the story to answer. When we step into Act 2, it is often called the confrontation or the middle. This is the first time where we usually meet, the protagonist. And how he's going to impact our main characters or how he's going to thwart the main characters about doing what they're trying to do. It is also the point where we start raising the action in the story so that there is more things happening. Because we've already kicked it off, the things which have started to put in place should start happening and they start on their journey. So this is the journey of things going on. It is not about the destination, it's about the journey. It's also where you introduce the most conflict. So characters, who or what are the main oppositions to our main character getting the goal that we set up in the first act. And these things really have to come to a head in Act 2 so that we know how he's going to get around it. We also need to raise the stakes so that we feel that if he doesn't get the goals which were set up in Act 1, we find out exactly what's going to happen or what is at stake, what's going to be lost if he doesn't get them. We fill in all the spaces. At the end of these, towards the end of the second act, we also get the next plot point. So what's the key point that's going to change the direction of the story and make it go to ramp up everything that goes on. We need to get that final plot point to kick us off into the final act. Then into Act 3, which is often called just the resolution or the end. Act 3 will always have the climax in it. So it's the big point where everything happens and we go, yes! Or we go, oh no! But the climax is the part of the movie which has been building up all the way through. It should bring together all the development arcs of the characters so that they have their final wrap-up so you feel satisfied with that story. It also should answer all the questions which were posed way back in Act 1. So all the questions that were asked of the story should be wrapped up somewhere in Act 3. If you're enjoying this content, please support this channel by checking out my book, Palmerston Ridge. There'll be a link in the description below. So that brings us to Our movie, Klaus. Please be aware that from here on in, I'm going to be doing any spoilers. So if you haven't seen the movie, just skip to the end. But if you enjoyed the movie, this is a great time to be breaking it down and sharing your ideas below about how you think Klaus fits in to the 3-act structure. So we're going to be looking at the timeline here for beginning, the middle, and the end, and where the key points or the key beats of this story fit in. As I said, it's only a framework, so you can shuffle things around, and not every story is going to fit within a 3-act structure. This is really the broadest way of constructing a story, so things can move around everywhere. But let's start off with Klaus and have a look at what's in Act 1. Act 1, we start off with establishing the world of which Jesper's in. The original world, like we said, is all about just establishing everything. We find Jasper in his lap of luxury, which is about setting up the character more than anything, because it doesn't really establish the world as such, which he gets propelled into. Because the first thing that happens to him is we get introduced to him as his luxury, and he gets focused into going sent off on his adventure really quickly, which is great. We got introduced to the main 2 characters and where they've come from and what they know. We also get introduced to then the side characters, which are going to be along Jasper's way in his journey. So we meet the boatman, and we meet all the other side characters that come along with him. And we establish the rules of the town. Now this is a big one within the framework of this story, is to fill in all the backstory of this town. But while a lot of the backstory comes in Act 2, we introduce the rules of the town here in Act 1, that these guys just don't like each other, and we know we're going to have war and conflict between these 2 sides that he's just all of a sudden gone into. We also find out that, his world of, caviar and skinned grapes is now gone because he's into the post office, and the post office in Smirensburg is horrible. And we get that feeling that he's put in to be distressed. And he knows what he's got to achieve, because right at the start he's been given his plans for what he has to achieve throughout this story. And now he's got to come up with a plan of achieving it. And this is the end. This is the first plot point, is he puts together a plan for what he needs to do to achieve his goal, which has been set. So the final thing in Act 1 is actually meeting Klaus for the first time. So we do get to meet him, and the confrontation that he has with him, he realizes that this character is going to be able to help him achieve his goal, but it's right at the end where they find out and come to that big realization of, or the final plot point of, how that's going to be achieved with the delivery of the toys. It's like, oh, all the bits for the story start coming together, and it's like, right, this is what we need to do. This is how it happens. Let's go into Act 2. So in Act 2, we start seeing the conflict happen between the characters. Not everything's smooth in Smirensburg. We learn that, these 2 just are going to somehow have to coexist because they're really close together. It's also a really nice story that starts developing between them as they start helping each other out. All the kids start hanging off him, so he's got to learn and teach the kids, which introduces that way, which is really nice. We also start building up the story itself and the adventures he's having with Klaus, about them, achieving his main goal, which is to get letters delivered. So how does he achieve that? Well, they have to work together, and through that working together, they develop their friendship as well as have adventures. So this is all about the middle. We also learn more about Klaus as himself as the character starts to develop, and you become, once you learn his backstory, you become more attached to him. He's very mysterious to start, but we learn more about him and we become engrossed in his story. It's also through this point that we start realizing that Jasper's changing. He's starting to learn more about himself, and the goals he set in the start are not going to actually fulfill what he wants, and he's learning about that. So we're starting to learn his personal journey, as well as the town starts going through a change or a metamorphosis, and we start seeing different side of Jasper too. And towards the end of Act 2, we get our final plot point. Now, really, when you look at the story, Jasper's now achieved everything he was actually set out to in point 1. In Act 1, he's achieved everything he was going to achieve. His father's accepted him, he's getting taken away, but through that journey, you know, we start getting into the hero journey, plot point, the hero's journey. He finds out, and he's grown to a point where he doesn't believe he's, you know, that's what he wants anymore. So what he started out to get is not really what he wants. So we get to this point where, you know, he's going, he's leaving. We do see this beautiful frame of him leaving everyone behind. But of course, that just then kicks us off into the final act, which is where all the awesome stuff starts happening. So we get all the action and the start to try and find out, to kind of wrap up, you know, to stop the main characters getting what they wanted. So we got the whole town after them. This is action, 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 action! And we get to a point where they wrap it up. They think they're victorious. Everyone thinks they're victorious. And yes, they knew that was all going to happen, and Klaus has the answer. And we get to the end of the story, we find out that everyone's actually happy. Once they've achieved their main goal, which was delivering all these presents, everyone's happy. And we find the town itself of Smearensburg is now bright and happy, and they've brought everything to it. And the final questions which were asked at the start of the movie have been wrapped up and closed, because for Jasper himself, he had his character arc closed, you know, towards the end of Act 2, where he's kind of finished off everything as we get into Act 3. But by the end of Act 3, we've also find out that we close off Klaus's storyline as well, which is beautifully done in this movie. They close his act off and they answer all the questions to the movie absolutely heart-wrenchingly beautifully. Definitely a beautiful film to see where it actually wraps up at the end. Well, because when you actually look at Act 3 is half action and then half the story to wrap it up. And when it does wrap up, it's a beautiful finish, and you feel very satisfied actually watching it, even though your heart's, you know, torn out, beating on the ground. Going, oh my God! But it's really a rewarding movie. So there you go, wrapped up in an overarching story and just an analysis of how this 3-act structure can be put into place. I delivered to you, Klaus. All right, guys, thanks very much for going through this one with me. I enjoyed Klaus. I really loved the movie and enjoyed breaking it down into its 3-act structures. If you've got any comments, please leave comments down below. If you think that I haven't got it right and the 3-act structure can be broken down differently, please leave a comment. Remember to like and subscribe, and until the next time, bye-bye.